So, what are some of the movements that fall under the umbrella of Expressionism? One of the first we can talk about is Fauvism. And Fauvism, the term loosely means like wild beasts. So, one of the things that critics were talking about when they saw these paintings, mainly a painting movement, was that they said it looked like a bunch of wild beasts painted these paintings. So, if you're paying attention, you might notice that the critics didn't like these paintings. They were making fun of them in a sense. And so, again, one of the things that Fauvism was really well known for is vibrant use of color, but to be very specific, arbitrary use of color. So if you go back to those beginning chapters and remember the types of color usage, right? Arbitrary means you're using color in a way that doesn't complement nature, which leads us to this painting by Henri Matisse, which is Woman with a Hat. And Matisse is probably the best known Fauvist. And here you can see what we mean by arbitrary use of color. We're looking at Madame Matisse's face here, and you have this application of color in ways that doesn't make sense with reality. So notice this avant-garde tendency here to break with what's expected, to break with realism or verisimilitude. They're going out of their way to say, okay, this is the way it's been done, but that's not the way we're going to do it anymore. So you may notice that these artists are rule breakers, right? They're avant-garde. Another Matisse you're seeing here, which is Red Room, again, holds to this idea of the use of color in an almost arbitrary manner. Maybe not so much here, but it is used in a way that we're not used to seeing, in this sort of passionate way that doesn't really complement how most people would decorate their homes. Color, is very much about mood. Red is a passion color. It's a color that gets you energized and active, and most interior designers will tell you you don't want to use this in most spaces unless you want to keep people sort of agitated in that space. If you think about looking at restaurants, that's always one of my favorite examples. Restaurants use a lot of red. Why do they do that? They want to make you get up and leave earlier so they can turn the table, right, and make more money. So they don't want you to be that comfortable. They want you to have this slight sense of, maybe I need to go. Maybe I don't feel quite so comfortable here, right? And the energy, I need to get up and move around. So you look at something like the color red here, it's very unusual. You may also notice that the sort of lines of reality are being blurred as well, where we have like the tablecloth running into the wallpaper and these vines that you start to wonder, are they growing? Really? Are they real? Then you have like what I call the window/painting. Like, are we looking out a window here at a landscape, or are we looking at a painting on a wall? Matisse would probably never say, So again, Fauvism really sought to break the boundaries of what was acceptable, use color in a very arbitrary way. Another movement that falls under the Expressionist umbrella is Cubism. Picasso is the most well-known Cubist, but he actually co-founded the movement with Andres Brock, who, again, doesn't get a lot of play, but, he was right there with Picasso. And I included this Far Side cartoon. If you don't know Far Side, look it up. It's pretty funny. They do a lot of art cartoons. Gary Larson did a lot of art cartoons. And here the joke is like, Picasso's seeing the real. We're the ones who are in the dark, right? So he comes home and gets an F in art, and the whole family looks like Cubist paintings. The most well-known Cubist painting is the first one that was created by Picasso, the first one from the movement, which is Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. French title basically means the women of Avignon. Avignon was what we call a red light district. It was an area where prostitutes hung out. So we're seeing a painting of prostitutes. But I would argue the prostitutes are just a vehicle for the experimentation. Think back to Impressionism. One of the things I always say about Impressionism was, it's not about haystacks. It's about the vehicle for the experimentation. Same thing here. I'd say it's really not a lot about prostitution. It's about what Picasso's experimenting with. And what he was experimenting with was this idea of how could you fracture space and fracture reality. So where Fauvists are playing with color, to me, Cubists play with space. So what we see here is this painting that basically is looking at, like, can you make space compressed to one plane? Everything looks like very 2D here. It's compressed to one plane. Can you make all time simultaneous, all the time kind of coming together at one point? Can you strip the rules of reality for what these women are doing? Because if you really look at the painting for a while, you realize that, the woman in the front crouching, her head's on backwards. That's not reality. So all these different viewpoints of reality sort of converging on one point in a way that, again, isn't really about the real, it's about experimentation. This painting is also well known for using non-Western influences, such as the masks. If you're looking at their faces, it looks like African masks. And the woman on the left looks like she's striding in an Egyptian pose. So Picasso was actually pretty political and very social for his time, and he had a lot of issues with prostitution and the issues there. And he also had a lot of issues with colonialism, slavery, and often used his paintings to explore sort of commenting negatively on those themes. So there's a little bit of that in there too. But when I try to explain Cubism to students, my example that I use is, to me, it looks like you're looking in a mirror at something. You push the mirror over and it shatters into shards. And a Cubist painting is like you're trying to take all those shards and put them back together to create, a vision of something. But just like looking in a broken mirror, it's fragmented, it's altered, it's never going to be quite right. And just a little side note about again, the sort of influences you see from non-Western culture, we refer to that as primitivism. This is a term today that I don't think we'd use the same word. It would be considered a very insulting word. But we're looking at, again, early 20th century. So these cultural nods to Africa, let's say in this case, it was a movement called primitivism. Picasso would have said, I'm actually doing something positive. I'm trying to bring light to African art. I'm trying to complement it. So we have to kind of forgive the term a bit from our cultural place and time, which again, to us, I think it's a little rude to call these cultures primitive. They just operate in a different fashion than European culture does. Some other ways that Cubism was explored, you can see collage. Early collage was actually a Cubist invention. And collage is when you take a lot of disparate elements, something like the rope around the frame, or some of the elements are like reproduced items like wallpaper, and you would try to patch and paste all that stuff together. So collage is actually part of Cubism. And you also can look at Cubist sculpture a bit to look into what Cubists were experimenting with. Now, what I like about these two together is with the Archipenko, you can kind of still get a real good sense of like the woman's body and as a representation. And then you can look at the Lipschitz and you're like, wow, that's really what Cubism is when you push it to its ultimate level.